Hello, everybody. I'm back again to try and help you with your happiness, and I'm doing this by looking at our thoughts and how we can better use our thoughts to live a better life, I suppose. So I'm going to do this through a few stories. I hope this helps. Um, so to start off with, I'm going back to when I was a young man. I was an apprentice. And one of my jobs was working on a lathe. And I remember the supervisor coming up to me one day and saying, the lathe is controlling you, you're not controlling the lathe. And I really didn't understand what he meant. And he said, well, you're making it all difficult. And I just, yeah, well, what do I do about that? So he said, well, what you do about that is um, you learn more about the lathe. Now, I knew that would come with experience, but it also come by thinking about what I was doing and what the lathe could do. And it's true, over a period of time, as I understood the lathe more, then it stopped controlling me. And that's the same with thoughts. Once you understand how they work, they can't run you anymore like they used to do. And so that's the point I'm making, and that's what I'm hoping to put across in this session, is to do with understanding our thoughts. So what I will start off with is um, I knew a chap once who was a magician, well, a friend of mine, and he did tricks. And one of the things he did was what he called a three-number trick. And what that meant was he got a piece of paper out and wrote on this big piece of paper three numbers. And then he put the three numbers in his back pocket and then said to me, right, I want you to think of a number between 1 and 10. Go on, think of it. And I did. And then he asked me to do a second number. And then he asked me to do a third number. And I was asked to remember them and repeat them to him, which I did. And I repeated them to him, and he got the piece of paper out of his back pocket, and there were the same three numbers. I was amazed. Well, I was astonished. I knew it was a trick, and after a bit of cajoling him, he told me how the trick worked. And in effect, what he'd been doing was he had been hypnotizing me. So he'd been saying things like, think of a number, um, forget that number, think of a number. And he was signaling 8 or he was signaling 7. I'm probably doing those the wrong way around. Everything's that way around on the screen with me. But anyway, or a 0. It can't be because it was between 1 and 10. But anyway, it was doing that. Sorry about that. Now, what I'm saying is, what I learned from that is that life can play tricks on us, that we see things and we believe that they are true. And what I'm saying is that what we see um, and what we think about what we see is not the same thing. So our consciousness convinces us that stuff is real, when what we're really looking at is a picture of our thoughts. And what again, the point I'm making is that the show it puts on enables us to enjoy our lives because our thoughts seem surreal, but they're not necessarily that real. So enjoy the trick, but don't fall for it. Now, when our consciousness drops, we have really worrying type thoughts, but they're not necessarily true. So, like the trick, don't fall for that. And another thing is that sometimes we think that others have got the answers that we haven't, and we look to them. And that's the same as looking to the magician who's doing the trick. We don't need necessarily to rely on others to show us how to live our life. And why I say that is that because nobody knows better than us on how to live our life because it's our life. And when we're not distracted by these tricks and what the mind does, making us think things that are real when they're not real, tricking us, um, we need to come back or wake up to realizing that we shouldn't fall for the tricks, because we have got behind our consciousness, our real self, our true self, is what tells us what is real. So instead of being mesmerized by life, mesmerized by all magicians in life, who are equivalently doing often the three-card trick, and don't get me wrong, there's some very genuine people around. But again, as I've said, thoughts give rise to feelings, and you'll always know when someone is genuine because they get the feeling, because there is something, and it's not necessarily like a thought like that, but just a knowing that gives you the feeling that it's real. So just enjoy the magic, but remember it's a trick. Now, I do classes with people, and I had one particular class where one chap kept going on about how he felt upset most of the time. He said that his thoughts were of feeling being put down. And what he remarked was that he wished he felt as he did when he was a kid, when the teacher stuck on his class book stars or little aeroplanes which said he'd done well. And he said to me, you know, I'm 73 years old now, and I thought by now I would have learnt better, because he was hoping that life would give him all these stars and little aeroplanes that that teacher had done. And according to him, that just wasn't happening. Fortunately, another person in the class the next week brought in a book, and it was called You Are Special. And the book had been written in 1997 by a chap called Max Lucado. And it was about little wooden people called Wemmicks. And the Wemmicks were a strange set of people. And what happened was, when some Wemmick did a kind of performed an astounding maneuver, like standing crates one on top of the other a mile high and then standing on the top, everybody applauded, and they put stars on him and things like that. So what they thought, you know, well, there's a nice star, you're great. But if a Wemmick wasn't up to doing things like that and didn't do things like that, they put on the Wemmick a little grey dot, stuck a dot on the Wemmick instead of the star. And the point about this story is that when we get in life things right or wrong, we metaphorically give ourselves, if it's more wrong than right, more dots than stars. And yeah, that happens to all of us. We do that to ourselves. But those bad thoughts can shrink in a second. We don't have to worry about them. And there are like 5 magic words we could always use here or try and remember is, you don't have to think that. In other words, if you are pinning a grey dot on yourself, you don't have to think that. In fact, in the Wemmick story, there was one special Wemmick who had no stars on whatsoever, or dots. And the thing about that Wemmick was, the other Wemmicks tried to stick dots on that person, and they just fell off. And that Wemmick knew it. And when the author of the story talked about this Wemmick, the Wemmick just said, I don't care about stars and dots, I don't need them. So, in other words, it was going back to, you don't have to think that. And when you don't have to think that, then, in other words, stars and dots doesn't come into it. When you do think that, you go into the detail of that. In other words, I would like more stars, and these stars are better, or I'd like aeroplanes instead of stars, and I don't like these grey dots. That's a detail of what you're thinking about, but you don't even have to think that in the first place. We are not our thoughts. We are the space that they come from. So when we switch from those type of thoughts and don't have to think that, we are going putting our attention on what is true instead of the opposite, which is habitually feeling false thoughts. And the reason I say that is because the truth is we are already okay. So when we start doing our thing, and we do our thing better, when we're not star collecting, then we start doing really what we love, what we enjoy doing. And when we start doing that, instead of doing the things to collect stars, then because we're doing what is us, what we love, that synchronizes us with what life is, with the universal energy of life. You might call it God, I don't know, spirit. But this is us keeping in touch with our real self instead of false pursuits. And that's what makes us come alive. And that Wemical, or as the dots just fell off, even the stars just fell off, was alive because it knew what mattered. And all the misery starts melting away in terms of any habitual put down thoughts that try to stick to you. So try doing that and you'll find out that it works. It really does. Right, so let's have a look at another story. Okay. Oh yeah. Gas meters bleep. It's the truth. Well, it was about a year ago now, and so I keep going in and out of focus. It's my camera. I don't know. Anyway, I must get a better camera. And the neighbours rang on my doorbell and said, "Do you know you've got like this bleeping sound coming from your gas meter?" And so I went outside, stared at my gas meter, which was bleeping, and thought, "Oh my dear." Anyway, I rang the gas board. Well, it was a bank holiday weekend, and nobody could come. And so I got on the interweb and looked at gas meters because this gas meter had never bleeped before, and found out that gas meters do bleep. And so as soon as I could, so we're talking about from the Friday to the Tuesday, because it was a bank holiday Monday, so it took all that time with the neighbours. On a night time when you got a bleeping gas meter, well, it really sounds at 1 o'clock in the morning. In fact, I was out at 1 o'clock in the morning listening to how loud it sounded. And when I finally got through to the gas board, I said to them, and I'd been on the internet, that gas meters do bleep, and they sent a man around. And my gas meter is outside of the house. Sorry, I should have said that in the beginning. But it'd only been gone a minute, and the doorbell rang, and he was stood there, and he said to me, "It's not your gas meter that's bleeping." So I said, "Oh, I thought it was." He said, "Oh, come outside." And we stood outside of the gas meter. And I said, "Well, it is bleeping." And he said, "I know it's bleeping, but your gas meter's been there 30 years, and it's not the type that bleeps. It's just the modern, what they call it, intelligent gas meters that bleep. If the battery's low." But he said, "This hasn't got a battery." Well, I said, "It's bleeping, isn't it?" And he said, "Yes, it is." And with that, he jumped back and he said, "It's not coming from the gas meter. It's coming from the dustbin next to it." And I'd never noticed this before, that my dustbin was next to the gas meter, which it was. And he said, "It's a bomb." And I said, "Well, don't be blinking daft, you know." Anyway, to cut a long story short, I opened up the top of the dustbin, and there on top of the dustbin was a CO2 meter. Well, in fact, 2 CO2 meters that a few days ago I'd replaced with new ones because their due date had expired. But I had forgotten to take the batteries out. So the batteries were doing their job and bleeping because there was no fresh air in the dustbin. Um, and he laughed because he said, "I can't wait back. I can't wait to get back to the depot and tell the lads this is a new one on me." So the whole point about the bleeping gas meter story is that um, we all thought something was happening that wasn't happening. We thought that it was the gas meter that was beeping. So did I. So did he. And the gas board had told us that, so it must be true. When the way it wasn't coming from that. And especially so, and I mentioned this earlier, because it's our own thoughts. Once we get convinced, because the gas board tells us they bleep, etc., etc., we think, and it's our thoughts, so they must bleep. And when we believe in our thoughts, that can cause us a lot of trouble because, um, people say, "Oh, I get so well." I remember my mother saying to me that because my father was a professional driver and he had to pass an advanced driving test, and the first time he failed it, and my mother said, "If your father had had a gun, he would have shot himself." Well, good job he didn't have a gun, but um, you know, in other words, don't act on a thought sometimes because it's irreversible. And often we have thoughts of, say, low self-esteem and we act on that. And so the moral of all this story is a thought only has the power that you give to it. Um, and yes, sometimes we do have bad thoughts. And again, the point is, if we continue with the bad thoughts, we stand a high chance of getting more of the same. Because what persists is what we put our attention on. So we need to start seeing thoughts for what they are, just thoughts. And they can be true, but they can be false. We need to stand back from them, our thoughts, I mean, and give them a chance to cool off in order to allow new thoughts with a better perspective, perhaps, to come in. Unless, of course, the gas man tells us differently. um, so there's another thing. After all this furore over the bleeping gas meter that wasn't really bleeping, the next day the problem disappeared because the gasmen took the bin, emptied the bins. And so that was a funny thought, is that if I'd have done nothing, it would have just disappeared anyway. So as we know, when we leave thoughts alone or problems alone, things have a natural way of resolving themselves. So go to another story. Let's have a look. What have I got here? Another story. Looking for the feeling. Yeah. I mentioned that feelings come from thoughts. They do. So bad thoughts, bad feelings, good thoughts, good feelings. And this story talks about a time when I was cutting down on my alcohol consumption. Giving it a couple of days rest and all the rest of it. It was good advice. So I started drinking because I like my beer, non-alcoholic beer. And there I was sipping the beer, trying to convince myself that, oh yes, this is very good stuff. It's okay. It tastes just like beer. But basically, I knew it wasn't the same. And this is the point I'm making, is that when we put our senses to us, most of us know when something is or is not the real thing. We just do. We've got that inner ability to know. And we get that knowing from the type of feeling we have about something. Gut feeling. Is the feeling good? Is it bad? And we all have a way of knowing what the real thing is. And that is an invaluable gift. So it means that it helps when we look to our feelings. So when we feel things are wrong, often we dig in and fight against that to try and make things right. Now, again, is this the right thing? It's a natural reaction when things are wrong to do that. So we will fight this thing and make it right. But if we go kind of give it a pause. In other words, let's see the red light instead of seeing the red lights and going a little bit that about it. In other words, taking a step back, then we wait for our wisdom to come through. And sometimes it does take a while for those feelings to come through. I remember once I got a loan for a motor car and I was over the moon. This was in the days when you couldn't really easily get loans. And I woke up the next day and something said, Vic, you can't afford to pay this loan off properly. And I went back and I cancelled the loan and I never bought that shiny car. And it was just something told me I'd done the wrong thing. And years afterwards, I've come to rely upon that knowing. But at the time, I was so keen that this problem of not having a car be resolved that I didn't see the red light stopping me. I didn't give my feelings a chance to come into play. So look for the feeling. Feelings come from thoughts and not always as immediate as you want them to or think they should. But that wisdom does guide us because our feelings look for the feeling. That's what I'm saying. Right, another story. The jam jar theory. This was, again, about a year ago. The BBC presented a health awareness programme on depression. In fact, it was called Alistair Campbell, Depression and Me. Now, Alistair Campbell was Tony Blair's Labour Party spokesperson, and he figured quite a lot in the successful election of Tony Blair in 1997. So a lot of people knew about or know of Alistair Campbell, very outspoken chap. But he suffered from depression or suffers from depression, I don't know. And on this program, he'd undertook electromagnetic brain stimulation, another treatment called psilocybin treatment, which is basically the taking of magic mushrooms, as well as genetic counselling, whatever that is. I suppose looking back to see if there's any other people in his genetic tree that suffer from depression. And just offhand there, let me just tell you is no, that is not a big factor in us having depression. It's this that causes depression. And none of these treatments that Alistair Campbell undertook stood out, except one thing that he was referred to, which was different to those three, was the jam jar theory. And I'll tell you what this is. Apparently that's what sorted him out and it helped. So, and he said he felt much better. I think my camera's having a bit of a hissy fit here. Sorry about this. Anyway, now we all have a personal jam jar, if you look at it that way, which can get filled up with thoughts of various kinds, many of which can cause us pressure because we get thoughts in this jam jar and it builds up inside us. But, and this was explained differently, but this is my take on this, is that, yeah, pressure can build up with all these thoughts in this jam jar in here. But in reality, we have an infinite jam jar that can never be filled up to breaking point. It's infinite because our consciousness is infinite. So the pressure cannot build up. And because we are naturally built, this is the way we actually are, to have more helpful thoughts than hurtful thoughts. And we are, because that's why we survive in the end. And because our jam jar is infinite, then it means that we can keep on filling our jam jar up with thoughts. Well, that's telling me that I've been talking for too long, so I'll just finish this story. What it means is we can keep on filling until a tipping point is reached of more helpful thoughts than adverse thoughts. Now that's good. So this means that unless we really try and keep our attention on the bad stuff in life, the jam jar, our personal jam jar, is always good. So in other words, unless we force ourselves to be miserable, and some people do, it's called secondary gain, and it means, hey, I'm miserable. Like, please help me. Look at how miserable I am. But in actual fact, when you take your mind away from that and just kind of accept that there is something inside of you that looks for more of the good than of the bad, then and that's your personal jam jar, that eventually it's more full. Well, it's the cup half full more than half empty job. So I've been told by my dinger that I've gone over the time a little bit for attention. So thanks for listening. I'll try and talk to you again during this lockdown, which we're all still in. Try and get out of as much as you can and enjoy it as much as you can. And like I did with the lathe story right at the beginning, don't let it run you, because once you understand how thoughts work, then you'll just they can't get away with it anymore because they know that you're onto them. And once that's so, their game's up. They've been caught in the act, as it were. Then you take control. Thanks a lot. Cheerio. Bye bye. All my love.